Welcome to the Gambling Files podcast. There is an episode that has no intro because Fintan is away. He's actually, I think he's making dinner for somebody. I think he's got dinner guests tonight. That should tell you something very important about not sort of the balance of power in this podcast, but the fact that I just have no fucking life whatsoever. I would like to mention, as we're not recording an intro specifically for this one, which we usually do, I would like to mention our fabulous sponsors who are all considerate lovers, all extremely virile, probably all have hair, starting with Optimove, providers of CRM software to the iGaming industry. Moving on to Clarion Gaming, the organizers of the ICE Expo, which is in Barcelona early next year. Be there or be square. And our beautiful, shiniest, newest sponsors, Every Matrix. Nothing to do with Keanu Reeves. Everything to do with software solutions to run your gambling business. So, with that out of the way, this episode's guest, and now I'd sometimes I get people on here because I'm a bit of a fanboy, and I know Fintan does that as well. And I am a bit of a fanboy of this journalist. And I'm not blowing smoke up your ass either. I genuinely am, because I write a daily newsletter for the Gaming Boardroom, and I frequently share your articles in that because I think they're very, very good. I particularly like your opinion columns. So we're joined by Josh Moon, an investigative journalist from the Alabama Political Reporter. Josh, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I love the intro. It's very well done. I would really like to know what he's having for dinner. Is keeping him away.
It's going to be something good. I mean, he's like, when you get a picture in your head of a board member for some faceless corporation and they got a big fat cigar and chunky shit gold jewelry and all that, that's what Fintan's like.
Oh, nice. If
you like that,
that's good. I like that.
I must compliment your barber, by the way. You've done an excellent job.
Thank you. He's very good. He's very good. He works daily, and which I appreciate. It's very inexpensive, I found.
Excellent. I've been doing my own. I was using a foil shaver, which actually does a great job. Gets very, very close, almost as close as a wet shave, but not quite. I was using a foil shaver, and I didn't notice there was a little imperfection in the foil. God knows how it happened, but a little. And I basically etched a grid into my head.
Yeah, it'll do that. It's I tend to stick with the Gillette. Yeah, I tend to just stick with the Gillette kind of deal. Just hit it in the shower and go on about my day.
It's a good call. Yeah, I've been doing that myself.
Yeah.
And Fintan should try it because he's got loads of hair. I mean, he's got our share.
Yeah. See, I mean, I've got better things to do than keep up with all that.
Yeah, I hear you. I think if I'd known how much I'd enjoy having a cue ball noggin, I would have shaved my head years before I needed to.
Yeah. Same for me. Same for me.
It's, I don't know about you, but it's changed my relationship with my pillow completely.
Yeah. You got to get the right pillowcase. Otherwise, because you don't want that. Your head tends to get hot or really cold, and so you got to have just the right thing and the right pillowcase. It makes all the difference.
You can get a thing in the UK. I don't know if you can get it over there, but it's called a chillo, and it's a cold pillowcase.
Oh, well, I have one of the. It's not called Chillo, I don't think, but I have one of those that's supposed to be 20% cooler or whatever pillowcases that stays pretty cool, and I like it a lot. It helps me sleep. I don't get the hot head unless I get wound up about something stupid over here. But otherwise, the sleeping hot head, I don't get that anymore.
Of all the tangents we've ever gone off on in this podcast, this is one of the strangest. Actually, is it? We've done some really crazy conversations in the past. But the reason I asked you on here was you did an opinion column quite recently, and it was really, really good, and it was about how it's completely bonkers that there is not legal gambling in Alabama now. Are you from Alabama originally?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So can you tell me anything about the state? I mean, is it how big are the population centers? Is there a lot of people, or is it agricultural? Do you know what I mean? Because everybody knows the name Alabama, but we need cold hard facts.
Right. No, it's there's not a lot of big cities. We have a handful: Birmingham, our Birmingham, and Huntsville, and yeah, right. So clearly, yes, you're not nearly as likely to be murdered in the other. But so we have Birmingham, we have Huntsville, we have Mobile, Montgomery. So we have decent enough population centers, but we don't. They're not that big, and so we're largely agricultural, and a the Christian church, especially the Baptist, play a pretty big role still around these parts, and so that's kind of what was impeding us from getting gambling for a long period of time, was that sort of relationship with the church.
Is Alabama part of what's traditionally described as the Bible Belt?
Oh yes, yeah, we're the buckle, baby. We're holding this whole thing together down here. It's
holding the trousers.
We don't mess around. That's right. That's right. Yeah, and got a firm lock on the zippers as well. And so it's we're right in it. We love to pretend that we are more Christian than everybody, as we are also somehow ranked first for internet porn as well. So, but listen, those two things are not mutually exclusive, I guess.
And it's good to be first for something.
Yeah, well, that's we once had a governor who said we're first in everything bad and last in everything good. So that's and that was our governor, who was governor at the time that he said it.
Okay, I've got to ask. I don't know if I should ask this question. You're probably going to hang up if I ask this. What's the legal age for marrying in Alabama?
Man, I think it might be 14. I believe with parental consent, it's 14. I know sexual consent is 16 because we have that pop up quite often. And so, that is it's not as bad as some other states. We have some others that are worse. And so it's, yeah.
So it's a very stop me if I'm wrong, but it's a strongly Republican leaning state. Yeah.
Oh, as strong as you can be. Yes.
Okay. Now, can you give us a bit of background on gambling in the state? Like, is there nothing at all? Is there not even any racetracks? Is there nothing? Is there no tribal? There's nothing.
No. There is. Yeah. So we started out and I wrote and I could probably send it to you. I wrote a long piece that was essentially the history of gambling in Alabama. And it was I think it was a 7 or 8 part series that I did for my previous employer at the Montgomery Advertiser. And it just, I went in to my editor, had a really great executive editor at the time. And there was an argument in our state legislature about electronic bingo. And he had come from another state, and he basically called me in and was like, dude, the hell is this with electronic bingo? What are we talking about here? Why are we having this fight? And so I started trying to explain it to him. And then as I was doing so, I kept trying, all right, well, let me explain that. And I kept taking a step back, and then I would take another step back. And finally I got back to the 70s when we first introduced dog tracks, dog racing, in the state. And Alabama at the time, and I believe it was 82, 83, somewhere right around in there, we opened up a dog track called Victoryland. And it was actually our third. We had one in Mobile, we had one in Greene County, but neither of them were particularly notable. And in this dog track, just I guess location and marketing of the gentleman who ran it, who became a friend of mine, Milton McGregor, and he was such a fantastic marketer of gambling, and he looked like what you would expect an Alabama gambling magnate would look like. I mean, the long gray hair, the little portly guy, and I mean, just as bombastic. And I mean, he's like a John Grisham character. Honest to God, but he was unfailingly nice, unfailingly optimistic, unfailingly generous. I loved him to death, and thought he was just fantastic. But that dog track became the nation's largest dog track, or the most successful one, for a period of, I want to say, 3 or 4 years. I mean, they were pulling in $300 million in the early '80s, which was a just off the chain amount of money for that period of time in dog racing, and he became essentially King Midas here, and then became a political player. And so we had those dog tracks for a number of years, and they were very, very successful. But then in the early '90s or mid '90s, there started to be an influx of different forms of gambling in states around us. Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, all implemented lotteries. Mississippi started to allow in the '90s casino gaming. With Native Americans, with the Choctaws and some other folks that opened up casinos there. And then when they expanded that down to the Gulf Coast and Biloxi, that's when things really started to take off, and the business for the dog tracks started to plummet. And so Milton McGregor once told me that he drove over to Tunica, Mississippi, which, if you've ever been to Tunica, Mississippi, it is essentially a cornfield with a casino in the middle of it. And he said this was his first look at this. They drove down a dirt road to get to this casino. The road was not yet paved. When he got there, outside of the building, there was a line of people standing out in front of it. And he said, "Oh, well, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. I guess they're not open." It's come to find out it was the line of people waiting to get in to the casino, because they, at that point, were over capacity, and you had to wait on somebody to exit before you could get in. And he said there was probably 200 people standing outside. And he said a lot of the cars that were parked out there in an unpaved field at the time, had tags from Alabama. License plate tags from the state of Alabama. So that's where his business was going. And then when the Biloxi casinos opened, they started busing folks from Birmingham, Mobile, and other places to those casinos on a daily basis. Free buses would come and pick folks up, and they would take them over to those casinos. And it just crushed the business model for, by that time, McGregor had a dog track at Victoryland, and he had the Birmingham race course, which was originally a horse racing track, but had been converted by that time to a dog racing track, and which, oddly enough, just sold to the Porch Band of Creek Indians in anticipation that we may get some form of gambling passed in this legislative session that's coming up at the first part of the year. But to answer your question in a long-winded form, yes, we've had gambling for a long time, and then as they went along through that, as he saw that business being crushed, he began, and others that were in because we still had one in Mobile, still had one in Greene County, dog tracks, and they all started trying to figure out ways to counteract that through various gaming forms. And at the same time, in the early 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s is when the Porch Band of Creek Indians, they had become federally recognized, and they had begun playing paper bingo at bingo halls on their reservation lands. And they then started in the early 2000s to implement electronic forms of electronic bingo, which look and act a lot like slot machines, basically. And so at the same time, Milton McGregor and some of the other folks, Nat Wynn and people that own some, Paul Bryant Jr., that own some of these casinos, they were, or the dog tracks, they started trying to figure out ways to implement other gaming to offset what they were losing in Biloxi. And they landed on they tried a bunch of different things, just the electronic machines, electronic video poker, all sorts of things that they used to try to get around the laws, and trying to adhere to the laws while also trying to get the laws changed to make it more viable for them. And it started this long fight. And finally, everybody landed on electronic bingo in the early 2000s, 2003 or so. And so we've had a number of constitutional amendments passed in our state to allow bingo. And they then took those and transformed that from paper bingo into electronic bingo, and they all started playing. And there have been absolute legal wars over these things ever since. And I mean, it was a cash cow for a long period of time. For 2000, I would say 2003 or 4 up until 2008, they were all running electronic bingo machines. And Victoryland and the Birmingham race, well, Victoryland mainly, he didn't use them in Birmingham because they didn't have the bingo amendment at that time. But they were just pouring money into those places through those basically slot machines.
That's interesting because bingo in some states is like super protected because the churches use it for fundraisers, etc. So it's interesting that there's not that division holding up the Bible Belt's trousers.
Well, there is. Yeah, so basically what happened in 2009, I believe it was, is our Alabama Supreme Court, after the governor out of the blue decided that electronic bingo was no longer legal. He didn't feel like electronic bingo was legal any longer. He took it to the Supreme Court. He sued these places to shut them down, implemented raids using state troopers to come in and seize machines and things. And the Supreme Court then ruled that the only bingo that was legal in Alabama, they had a test that they had to run, and you had to play against other players. You had to it had to be on a paper card. You had to call out your bingo score or your bingo. There were certain things that had to be done for it to constitute bingo, which was essentially protecting the churches from the games that they were going to be playing, while outlawing the machines and making it. I mean, it was completely made up. I mean, there was no precedent for this. No other state has done this. At the same, what was really idiotic about it was at the same time that they did this, they knew full well that the Porch Band of Creek Indians could operate the electronic machines on their lands and on their properties because they had federal protection. The lands that they were operating on are federally protected because they're tribes, they're federally recognized tribes, and so they're not subject to state laws. And so they knew full well that what it was going to do is hand over basically a monopoly to them. And they attempted to sue them for this, but it went nowhere. So so that's led us to where we are now and the mess that we currently have.
That mess that we currently have, it's kind of so you've got there really aren't. I mean, even the smallest states in the US have a reasonable amount of people. There's a lot of people in the US. There's what is it, 370 million people or whatever. And I think, do you know what? Actually, I've got the population here somewhere. So population of the state is 5 million people, right? And if it's heavily agricultural, then they're probably going to be fairly concentrated. I can see why somebody would want to put gambling in there. It's not going to be like a Vegas style resort, but I can see why that, because it's all about people. It's all about concentrations, isn't it?
Have you looked up? Have you ever looked at the Porch Band of Creek Indians, Wind Creek Have you ever looked at Wind Creek and their facilities?
I have not. I mean, I'm familiar with them as an operator, but I'm not familiar with their
Right.
operations individually. Is it pretty
You should
sexy?
look up their yeah. It's a very nice place. It's a very very nice place. It's I would put it up as a resort. It's a very very nice. It's small scale, small on a small scale, but they do a very nice job with that. They also operate casinos outside of their trust properties in Pennsylvania, and now they just opened up a new one in Chicago. So I mean, so that they're doing quite well. And I tell people the stories about there are a couple of stories I tell people whenever they ask me how much money. Sorry, got some dogs barking here, I tell a couple of stories that I tell people whenever they say, "Well, I mean, my God, it's Alabama. I mean, how much money could we be talking about here?" So the one that I would say is Milton McGregor told me the story one time where because of our laws, we have a bunch of people that play illegal gambling. Okay, that offer illegal gambling operations all around, and typically they will use these electronic bingo machines. They'll put them in the back of a gas station somewhere. There was some in the back of a laundromat that we found not too long back. There was some in the beauty salons, at barbershops and those sorts of places. But typically, what they'll end up doing is they'll get a strip mall type place. That has a business has left. They'll throw some machines in there, and then they'll just kind of on the quiet, tell people, hey, if you want to come and gamble, here's it is, and they'll run it for a while until the local authorities find out and come and shut it down. And the reason that they do it is because number one, the penalties are misdemeanors in our state, which means you're basically going to pay a fine, and that's going to be it. And so, as long as you're making enough money to cover the fines, who the hell cares, And there was a guy who's famous in one of our backwoods redneck towns for running some of these things all around kind of northern Alabama. And Milton McGregor one time told me that he ran into this guy out in Vegas at a convention. For a gaming convention where they were showing off some of their new machines and some of the things that they were promoting out there, and he was out buying new machines, and he was asking him what's that plane that you flew in on, because Milton owned several different planes, actually had where you could a plane rental business, and so he was telling him about the plane he'd flown in on, and he said, why? And he said, well, I've been looking at getting me a plane, and he was like, really? And he was like, yeah. And he said, listen, and the next time you come through this little town where he lived, he said, would you mind stopping? And I said, I got a question I want to ask you. So the next time he went through, Milton stops, and this guy takes him out into this. He described it essentially as like a pole barn type place out behind his house. And he takes him in, and they go down a set of stairs into like a basement type area down there. And Bill said, I'm starting to get a little nervous at it. He said, but we go in, and he said, we open up this big metal door, big security door that he has on this thing. And inside of this room, he said, this room is, he says, probably, I said, I don't know. He said, it's probably 2,000 square feet down in this thing. And he said, all for the entire room is just filled with 50-gallon drums. And he's like, what in the hell is this guy? Is he about to show me his meth operation or something here? But he takes him over to one of the barrels and flips the lid off, and it's filled with cash. And it's cash from all of these little back of the gas station operations that he's running around these places. And he's got so much of it, he can't wash it fast enough. And he's having to store it in metal drums in this basement. And Milton said the guy told him that there was $30 million down there. at last count, and they had brought in some more, so he didn't really know exactly how much was down there, and he was looking for advice on how he could wash it and launder it. So, buddy, I have no idea. I do mine legal. I can't help you with that. But that's, when people talk about it, and there's so much money. There's so much money being made under the table around here that it's just and the laws are so screwed up. It incentivizes us to keep doing the illegal stuff instead of properly taxing this stuff and legalizing it and getting some money for people.
So what would be the answer then? I mean, you say the way that legislature works in the States is just like, it's arcane. It's just absolutely bizarre. You got some states where they sit every other year. How do you expect to get anything fucking done? But anyway, that's by the by. So you've got a legislative session starting early next year. What needs to happen for anything to change? And let's be realistic here. Is it actually likely to?
All right. So typically, what has put the kibosh on anything really happening over the last several years, maybe in the last couple of decades, has been a kind of competing interests in a few different areas. Number one, you had the private casinos that were owned by the McGregor family, that were owned, by these other folks that run these dog tracks. And then on the other side of that, usually you had the Native Americans, which in our states, the Porch Band of Creek Indians. They held an interest in things, and so they were looking out for their interest. Then you had other competing folks that were kind of involved in this thing. One is a farmers association here that they don't want gambling because they don't want the competitors when it comes to influencing the legislature. And you have, for a long time, also the churches played a big role in this, although that's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit now as gambling has become more and more prevalent around society. And, especially we love our college football in this state, and with college football gambling taking off like it has, that's really kind of softened the stance that a lot of those folks have taken on it. But those competing interests, and really, I always argued that if you could ever get the private casinos and the Porch Band of Creek Indians kind of on the same page going into a legislative session, then you would probably be ahead of the game. And I think that has happened now. It really happened in the last session. They were both on board with a gambling bill, a comprehensive gaming bill that would have brought in new laws, would have toughened the penalties for illegal gaming, would have issued out casino licenses at about 10 different places, would have allowed for a lottery and sports wagering. And so they were both on the side of this thing with a few minor tweaks here or there that could have been passed, I think, and appeased both of them. It didn't because of really kind of some foolishness that just went on. And I think maybe that is now closer to becoming a reality because of the sale recently from the McGregor family of the Birmingham race course to the Porch Band of Creek Indians. And so now they own that, which is kind of the crown jewel piece. That's Alabama's biggest city. It sits at the junction of three different interstates. It is a prime piece of real estate. It would be you could put a facility you could really put a Vegas style resort at this spot right here, tie it into some of the other things that have been built recently in Birmingham with athletic facilities, and really you could market out this thing as a place to come to for people all over the country, really all over the world for different events. But that now is laying in the balance of whether or not you're going to be able to get this legislation passed. And I think that it will, because that Birmingham portion was a sticking point last time. That whether or not it was going to be sold, who was going to own it, how it was going to be included in the legislation, that was a big factor in kind of the behind the scenes discussions that went on in our legislature. And so I think, with that being settled, it removes one of the other stumbling blocks that was in place. And so now we have an opportunity. We've had them before, but we have an opportunity where everybody seems to be basically on the same side, and it's just a matter of going in and getting it done, and getting enough votes in our legislature, and overcoming the Farmers Association to get it passed.
Surely farmers need to do shit for fun as well.
It's their main opposition to this is the fact that if you introduce this, then it creates overnight other power players in the government system in Alabama. It creates more people that are going to have a big seat at the table, and they don't want that.
But one of the things that will win votes on this is that Birmingham site, because I didn't realize the thing about the 3 interstates, but if you're even if you're talking about a relatively small Vegas property, you are still talking thousands of jobs. And
yes.
Anybody, because I'm from a rural area, anybody saying we'll bring jobs is like treated like a god.
No, listen. I don't understand why we have not sold this. Why the people, and I've told them over and over and over again. Look, you got to sell this thing as a jobs bill, because
Fuck yeah.
What it is projected. I mean, and they've had unbiased economic studies done of this, of what it would bring, and we're talking about $1 billion to start in tax revenue. With everything involved.
This is just off land-based operations. This isn't opening up online gaming, or is it as well?
No, well, now the sports wagering portion was online, but it's a tiny piece of the overall thing. What really changes it is the lottery portion of this, the statewide lottery that ties into the mega millions kind of thing, and then these 10 casino licenses that were going to come out of this, and when you add all of it together, all of that was going to generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion a year in tax revenue, and then it was going to kind of grow from there. And then, in addition to that, you had that it was projected that they were going to create somewhere between 12 and 15,000 permanent jobs, in addition to thousands of temporary construction jobs that were going to go into place, because each of those sites were going to be required to build a structure that met a minimum standard. And of course, you're going to put some in smaller locations that were not going to be required to, I think the Birmingham location they were going to be required to put up something like a $300 million facility at a minimum, or make $300 million worth of improvements to the existing facility. Now, I mean, that's nothing for the Porch Creeks. The one they built in Chicago was $570 million. The one they built in the things they've done in Pennsylvania was $380 something million. And they've talked openly about spending upwards of $500 million on whatever they would do in Birmingham if the right legislation was passed. And they've got the money to do it. I mean, yeah, man, you're talking about a shit ton of money. You know what I mean? I mean, coming in, and a shit ton of jobs that's going to be spent to boost the economy.
But we're talking about money that right now is going into a fucking drum in somebody's basement, or is going out to Mississippi,
in all these other states.
Out to Mississippi on a bus, or this, that, and the other. And I mean, I was looking at the figures earlier for not connected to this. Actually, I was writing something for somebody, and I was looking at the figures for Connecticut and how they've evolved over time. So it's figures for Connecticut from like 1972, I think, which I think was when the lottery was introduced there, around there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And like lottery has basically gone from 20 odd million, and obviously the price of things has changed significantly from the early 1970s. So I'm not saying that this is growth as such, but bear with me. To being just the lottery is now over $1 billion in Connecticut. Yeah. Which also houses two of the most profitable casinos in the US.
Yes.
They've got New York on the doorstep, obviously.
Well, of course, but I mean, and New York's about to do some things that'll probably cut into that. But at the same time, I mean, we know from our surrounding states, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, all of the best performing lottery sales locations in those states lie on the border of Alabama. Every single one of them. By a large margin. So this is my argument all the time. We have now for 20 years, we've put through a generation of Georgia children through college. We have a generation of children, thousands of kids, Alabama dollars have gone over into Georgia to educate those kids over there and make sure that they went to college and had an opportunity that our kids don't have. And it's because, and for what? What have we gained out of this? What moral high ground? I mean, has anybody ever looked at Alabama and thought that we were a hell of a lot more moral than Georgia? I mean, of course not. It's ridiculous the way we've done it. It's ridiculous the way we continue to do it. And until it changes, it's just ludicrous. But I honestly believe part of what holds us back on this is a fear of the education portion of this thing, is that we're going to start sending these kids to school and they're going to get an education and they're going to realize how fucked up things are in this state. And they're going to be like, well, we got to change that. And some of these dipshits that we've elected are going to be knocked out of there.
Evolution, not revolution.
That's right.
Do you watch any streaming services, Josh? Do they have those in Alabama?
Yes. Yeah. We have a few. Yeah. We've got the internet. Yeah.
Is it dial up? Yeah, because that's what it's like here.
We've got this new service called AOL.
I found a news story on the AOL site the other day and I shared it in the newsletter. I'm like, fucking AOL's still going. My God.
I know, right? Hey, listen, man. I swear to God, listen to this. I swear to God, when you get off of this, Google up the amount of people in America still using AOL dial-up service. Google that up. You'll be astounded.
Are they all in Alabama,
I swear to
Josh?
No, I maybe. I think they're more in some of the Midwestern states, but yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, in some places you're not going to have a great deal of choice, are you? So, but are you familiar with Cobra Kai?
Yes. Yeah, love it.
Have you? So you've seen it?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I've seen. Well, I think I watched the first 3 seasons. Yeah.
Wow. It's good. The last few people that I've asked on this podcast haven't been watching it, or they watched the first one. They're like, "Yeah, I really should catch up with that." I think it's like it's final season now.
Right. One of the reasons why is I have a 6-year-old, and she and I watched the original Karate Kid together not too long back, and it just kind of got me back into reminiscing about watching it. And then I started watching Cobra Kai, and it just that going back and remembering those guys and seeing them now, and then the way they were able to tie in the nostalgia from the original series, him going over to Japan, and finding the girl that he'd saved during it just, the whole thing was, honestly, I really, really liked it. I thought they'd done it. I mean, it's a little bit too much of a younger kid show for me in some regards. But the nostalgia carried me through.
Younger kid show.
Come on, the teeny bopper stuff. I mean, come on, man. Come on.
I love that shit. I love a good teen movie. So I mean,
I'm fine with it. I am.
Just before we tie up here, I didn't ask you about the Alabama Political Reporter. Tell me a little bit about the publication.
Yeah, man, it's an online publication. It was started by Bill and Susan Britt, and we now run it, and with them, and I mean, it's a great. We focus on politics. That's our niche. We don't worry about sports. We don't worry about entertainment. We don't worry about all the other stuff that's floating around out there. We just kind of dig in on politics and focus on what's happening in this state, and it become a kind of a go-to source, or not kind of, it is kind of the go-to source of for news, political news in the state. Our newsletter is, I guarantee you, read every day by pretty much all of the politicos, and so all of the news and things that happens around our state house and with our lawmakers, we report on that and focus on it and try to give everybody a good insight into what's going on. And why it is whenever our legislature's in session, their wallets always feel a little lighter.
Anybody interested in having a look or reading some of Josh's excellent work, and it is, I really do enjoy reading your work. It's www.alreporter.com. Don't go to the Contact Us page, because honestly, they look like a right bunch of misfits. I'm just kidding, but if Josh's colleagues listen, I'm kidding.
No, that's true. That's very true. Very true. Listen, it takes a bunch of misfits to do that shitty job. Okay, I mean, so it's you got to really dig in and get in on those folks.
I speak as a misfit, Josh. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. As things progress, it would be great if you come back on the podcast, because I want you to see Fintan's hair.
Man. Yeah, I would love to. I love to make fun of people who have hair. So I would love to come and do that.
Excellent. That's great news. Thank you, Josh.
Hey, seriously, anytime. Just give me a shout and we'll do it.